Hi everyone, it's HotWax93, and I think we've all gotten used to people on the left saying stupid things as of late, but recently I heard some journalists say something that was so egregiously idiotic that it needs to be addressed because far too many people will accept it as truth. This past Tuesday, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican nominee for governor of Virginia, won his election, and not surprisingly, Democrats are losing their minds. They've decided to blame their loss in this election on racism, and specifically on racist dog whistles. For those of you who don't know, the concept of racist dog whistles is that politicians, usually those on the right, will campaign on issues like crime, welfare, and affirmative action, and so forth, to secretly appeal to white racists with coded racial messages that only they can hear while attempting to take a mainstream position. Now, honestly, I think this is a self-defeating concept. Because if only racists can hear the racist message, then how can left-wingers who claim to be against racism, especially if they're also people of color, hear it and make the accusation? Of course, that's an entirely different rabbit hole that I hope to cover in another video, but suffice it to say, this concept has become an article of faith among journalists, left-wing scholars, and even some rank-and-file political observers. So anyway, here is Brianna Keister on CNN attributing Youngkin's election to racism.
Let's be clear, some of it was dog whistle.
Yeah.
Right? Some of it was dog whistle racism.
1,000%.
But for a lot of voters, that's not what it was. It was more this anxiety when it comes to schooling, having had their children out of school for so long, and obviously those not being choices that they made, but that were dictated for them. They may have agreed with them, but many clearly disagreed.
Yeah.
Here's Joy Reid on MSNBC making a similar claim.
Well, Trump approved Republican Glenn Youngkin's closing message to Virginia voters has almost singularly focused on weaponizing race, stoking hysteria over the coded boogeyman of critical race theory, which is not currently taught in any Virginia public school. From banning Toni Morrison's Beloved, this epic novel, a Pulitzer Prize-winning seminal work of American fiction that recounts the horrors of slavery, to casting himself as the candidate of so-called parents' rights, vowing to ban critical race theory, which again is not taught if elected. Again, it's not taught in any Virginia public schools.
First things first, I want to mention that Joy Reid is very public about her left-wing views and doesn't claim to be objective. Brianna Keister, on the other hand, is supposed to be a nonpartisan journalist, but here she is clearly making a partisan statement. Even if Youngkin really did campaign on racism, it's not objective or appropriate for a journalist to say so. So let's get that out of the way. Second, Joy Reid, as you can see from the clip, is black. Again, how can she hear the racism in the supposed dog whistle if only racists hear it? Third, people who are claiming Youngkin's victory is due to racism obviously didn't pay attention to the other election results in Virginia. The Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, who is a black woman, also won her election, and the Republican candidate for attorney general, who is Hispanic, has won his race as well. In the case of the race for attorney general, you had a Hispanic Republican defeating the Democratic incumbent, a white Anglo man who has admitted to wearing blackface in the past. If racism was driving Youngkin's voters, then you've got to explain why most of them voted for a black woman and a Hispanic man for the other two statewide offices that were up for election. Fourth, and this is the issue I want to discuss more in depth, there is nothing inherently racist about the issues Glenn Youngkin campaigned on. When Brianna Keister and Joy Reid accuse Youngkin of dog whistle racism, they're referring either to his support for banning critical race theory from schools or his attacks on his Democratic opponent for fighting against a parental notification bill of obscene material in schools. Let's address critical race theory first. Critical race theory is based on the belief that all of America's systems are designed to uphold white supremacy, that all white people are either implicitly or explicitly racist, and that any disparate outcomes between races must be due to systemic racism. Now, obviously, these arguments are faulty for a number of reasons, but again, that's for another video. Now, I can see why CRT would have appeal to people, especially on the left. Anybody who knows much about American history knows that there were racist systems for much of our country's history. There was slavery, there was racial segregation, there were racially motivated bans on interracial marriage, and so forth. And leftists and their allies are now claiming that if you are against teaching critical race theory in schools, then you're somehow against teaching kids about the racist parts of American history. This is a total straw man. Nobody is arguing that we shouldn't teach about the history of racism in our country. What people are objecting to is the suggestion that America is an inherently and irredeemably racist country, even in the present day. Systemic racism largely ended with the civil rights legislation of the 1950s and 60s, and while I get that changing laws is different from changing attitudes, it's pretty clear by any objective measure that there are far fewer racists in America today than at any time in the past. Moreover, numerous people of color have spoken out against CRT and its presence in schools. Polls have shown a significant majority of every racial and ethnic group, except maybe for blacks, are against critical race theory and think it's bad for our country. So even if real white racists are against CRT, being against it doesn't automatically make you a racist. And not only are there non-racist reasons to be against CRT, but there are also anti-racist reasons because critical race theory is itself a racist concept in multiple ways. CRT says that all white people are racist. Attributing a negative characteristic to all members of a race is basically the definition of racism. CRT says that people of color, particularly blacks, can't succeed in America because the systems are all rigged in favor of white people. That discourages blacks from trying to be successful, which means they don't try and end up falling behind whites. Then somebody who actually is racist could point to that as proof that blacks are an inherently inferior race. CRT values a person's quote-unquote lived experience above all else. So if you're white, then you have no right to talk about race because of your supposed white privilege. And if you're black, your experience is somehow considered to be more true because of your supposed status as an oppressed victim group. As a result of this, CRT has actively advocated for a restoration of racial segregation, creating separate safe spaces for blacks away from whites. Critical race theorists have publicly and repeatedly declared that they reject the inclusionary integrationist civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s as trying to work within an unfixable system and covering for white supremacy. And it's because of this that even many liberal commentators like Bill Maher have spoken against CRT and other woke racial concepts.
But I am what you might call an old school liberal who was brought up with the crazy idea that segregating by race is bad. That's what I was talking about. If we have 2 anthems, why not 3 or 5? Why not a woman's anthem, a Latino anthem, a gay, trans, indigenous peoples, and Asian Pacific Islander anthem? Because I'm not dealing with you, I'm not speaking to you, is not a way you can run a country. And most people of all backgrounds understand that already and don't even want to try to do it that way. I'm not out of step. Believing in separate but equal, that's out of step. By 67 years. Yeah. No. It was 67 years ago, in 1954, when the Supreme Court handed down their landmark Brown versus Board of Education ruling, which said, separate but equal isn't what we do here. We decided we're going to try to make this work together. I mean, we're a nation that professes diversity as our strength, but now half the kids' dorm rooms are determined by racial purity? Really? We can't even go to the gym together? Because what's next? What follows? Separate dorms, anthems, ceremonies, cafes, gyms, separate neighborhoods? That was redlining. They wouldn't let black people live in the town where I grew up. Then they did. The word for that is progress. It's where the term progressive comes from.
There's even an anti-racist organization dedicated to fighting critical race theory called the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. It's a great group, and I highly recommend you check out their channel elsewhere on YouTube. As Martin Luther King, a real anti-racist, once said, only light can drive out darkness and only love can drive out hate. You can't fight racism with more racism. So now for the other issue, which is the parental notification bill. Youngkin's Democrat opponent in this election was Terry McAuliffe, who previously served one term as governor from 2014 to 2018 and was trying to make a comeback. And late in the campaign, Youngkin ran an ad that attacked McAuliffe for twice vetoing a bill that would have required schools to notify parents of obscene content in class materials. The reason that the left is categorizing this as racist is because the push for this bill started after a mother of a high school student in Virginia learned he was reading the novel Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now, Toni Morrison is one of the most widely acclaimed Black novelists of all time, and Beloved is a book she wrote that is supposed to illustrate the horrors of slavery in the antebellum South. But as part of that, it includes explicit descriptions of sex and gang rape. First, there are plenty of other books you could read to help comprehend the atrocities that occurred under slavery. Uncle Tom's Cabin would be a good one, a book that was written during the era of slavery by an abolitionist. Or better yet, read a nonfiction book that chronicles what happened. There's no reason that Beloved has to be the book you read on that topic. Second, I highly doubt most voters knew that the bill referred to in the ad was prompted by this. The ad never mentioned Toni Morrison or Beloved, and in any case, the bill wasn't about banning books. It was simply about notifying parents about offensive content in schools. I remember getting permission slips in middle school to watch PG-rated movies, so this seems like common sense to me. And most of the state legislature in Virginia agreed. This bill had bipartisan support, including from 14 members of the Virginia Black Legislative Caucus, so obviously they didn't consider it racist. If you're going to say that this bill was racist, then you have to call those 14 black lawmakers that were in office at the racist as well. And by the way, Youngkin also talked about wanting to increase state funding for historically black colleges and universities in Virginia. He was even praised for this position by Douglas Wilder, the state's former Democratic governor, who was the first black governor in American history to be popularly elected. So clearly, Youngkin himself isn't a racist either, except in the left's bizarro universe where conservative or Republican is automatically synonymous with racist. Honestly, the fact that the news media is stooping to this level in their meltdown over this election is proof that they don't understand why the Democrats lost in the first place. For the last few years, leftist Democrats have been claiming that anyone who disagrees with their positions on race issues, especially if they don't follow the woke narrative, is a racist and a white nationalist, even if they aren't white. And tons of Americans, including many rank-and-file liberal Democrats, resent being called racist because they know, or at least believe, that they aren't racist. And maybe some of them are legitimately racist, but the vast majority aren't, as demonstrated by the results in the contest for lieutenant governor and attorney general. So in Virginia, these voters decided that they were tired of leftists and progressives smearing them as racist and fought back by voting for Glenn Youngkin. Whenever you begin attributing malice to your opponents, you turn them off. But the fact that so many on the woke left are still playing this card after the election suggests that they haven't learned their lesson yet, and until they do, they will keep losing elections where woke schools are a big issue. There's more I could say about this, but I think this covers the bases. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more like it, and hit the notification bell to get updates whenever I upload a new video. Thank you for watching. This has been Hot Wax 93, and remember, when everything is racist, then nothing is.